Hello everybody, I'm John, your host on the Prepared Mind channel here on Patreon. I'm about as red-blooded as an American as you're gonna get. So you're gonna love what I have to say about this shit. Okay folks, as usual, let's get right down to it. I'm going to have me a little bit of sip of scotch, and then I'm going to tell you some things that I know. And we're all going to get to think about it some more and share with each other. Okay, good. All right. Number one, I don't know if you're aware of the United Nations stance on gun control. I'm going to put a picture up here. I'm going to cover the whole screen. It's a picture of a handgun with a knot tied in the barrel. This is a big old statue they have on display, I believe in New York City. This is what they think of guns. Now, the United Nations, right, started as the League of Nations in World War I, became the United Nations after World War II. Right, it's supposed to be a community of nations agreeing about policy and law and human rights. My ass. The UN has been guilty for decades of wartime atrocities, just like every other nation that has been to war. They are corrupt, they commit rape, murder, they are underhanded, and I don't care what they think of anything I have to say about them. The United Nations is a criminal organization in my estimation. Anyone who is a government is. There is a difference, though, between what criminal organizations do and what governments do. The criminal organization doesn't pretend to be legitimate. That is, they act on the authority of the people at large and do whatever the hell they want. That is a fact. Every nation that has ever existed has murdered its own people and the people of other countries, including the United States. You can go look it up. Congress approving the experimentation on American citizens down in the South. It is not uncommon, and it's just the way it is. We need to accept that as adults. It's just the way it is. All governments commit atrocities against everybody. It's horrifying, it's terrible, and I want to see it stopped, but there's nothing I can do. Right, so I get prepared. In honor of this topic for tonight, I'm wearing this Homeland Security shirt with 4 famous Native Americans on it. And then the shirt says down below where it's not visible, fighting terrorism since 1492. The reason I thought this shirt was important to wear, it was important to buy because it was funny. Because I have one of those types of senses of humor that requires a little bit of understanding about me. When I bought it, I was at Four Corners, New Mexico, and it got my attention. But for this purpose, remember, the Native Americans were here before white folk. They had their own rules, their own way of life, no matter how barbaric we would consider that. Right? What it is a change came along that overpowered them, and that is the important part of this topic. The United States of America, under the U.S. Constitution, was founded. It was initiated on the principle that you and I have the right to keep and bear arms. That right doesn't exist by itself. The right that comes before that is the right to life and the right to liberty. That is freedom. And if you are not free to protect yourself, then how can you be free, period? So the right to keep and bear arms was written into the Constitution. To protect, to preserve your own life and protect your country. The people were told, yeah, that is a right. You have a right to live. Now, the United Nations has come along, and they've decided that people don't need guns. They don't need the right to protect themselves. Government are instituted. They're instituted among men to preserve these rights for us. Except I've already pointed out, all governments, including the United States, have committed murder, atrocities against other peoples and their peoples in their own nations. They sacrifice them, they test on them, they do medical tests, they do scientific tests. It is horrifying to see. So what do we have with the UN? The same thing the Native Americans have. We, you and I, as Americans, red-blooded Americans, believe we have the right to preserve ourselves, our lives, our families, our fortunes, and that we have the right to keep and bear arms in order to ensure we can continue to do that. The same way the Native Americans were overrun, if the United Nations is allowed to bring their "we're going to tie your gun in a knot" policy onto this land, you and I will be like the Native Americans. We will become a thing of the past, an archaic understanding of life, and we will become subject to some other organization, some body, some corpus derelictus that doesn't give a shit about your life and my life. Why do I say that? Because the United Nations is corrupt. Fact, the United Nations troops are corrupt. And what do they use? What is their means and their methods to ensure that their version of peace and equality and life and protection is there? They use guns. That's right. The United Nations, who says no one should have guns, has guns. They're like every other government on the world. They think they should have the guns and the authority, and everyone else needs to submit, to bend the knee to them. In America, we've always had this mentality of, fuck that. I have a right to keep and bear arms, and you will take it from my cold, dead fingers. Now, that's not just a catchy phrase. There's a lot of Americans that say, yeah, you're gonna have to kill me to come and get them. And it could happen. It could happen. You know, what are you talking about, John? Here it goes. Several months ago, I was contacted by someone who worked for the government for 30 years. Very high-ranking person. Now, he said, John, I have some information I want to share with you. And he did. One of the things he said is, United Nations troops are here in the United States, and they are training to take guns from citizens. This was months ago, and I thought, I've heard this story before. That is scary information. I don't like the sound of it, but it's coming from somebody who has credentials. Now, at the time, I said, give me pictures. Right? I want pictures of these guys. I want to know, who their commanding officer is. I want to know who they're reporting to if they're in the United States. I want to know those things. Of course, I never got those things, but I was told they're here in the United States. They're training with American soldiers, and they are going to take Americans' guns. And I thought, from my cold, dead fingers. Well, interestingly enough, just last week, some politician from Illinois, more directly, most likely Chicago, and I'm going to put a link, or have the admin put a link below the video to this news article. A politician from Chicago left Chicago, where he claims they've got a crime problem, a murder problem that is out of control and they can't solve. He goes to New York City. He goes to the United Nations and asks them for help in the great state of Illinois. Why would an official deal with an international organization, go to their office in New York, and ask them for help with a law enforcement problem, with a crime problem? Why? Well, apples don't fall far from trees. So if we've got that much crime in Chicago, I'm sure their political parents are very, very, very corrupt also. And I don't think there's a city, except maybe New York City, and I don't even think LA is in the top two, that is more corrupt and has been that corrupt for so long. I think everything in Chicago is named after someone in the Daley family for the last 100 years. If that doesn't sound like a crime racket, someone holding that much political power that long, an entire family, that's a fucking dynasty of corruption. Chicago is a dirty city. A lot of money there, a lot of people, a lot of wealth, but there's also a shit pile of crime. I don't think you could pay me enough to live there. Now that said, this politician goes and asks the United Nations for help. I was outraged. And then I was amazed that someone is that stupid that they think they could go outside our jurisdiction, outside his own state, and speak to an international organization about policing his streets. And again, what does the United Nations want? It wants your guns out of your hand and them policing us with their guns. Now, so we've got two elements. I've got the story from the government official who spent 30 years, high-ranking official, says the UN is here training. And now we've got a story about a Chicago politician asking the United Nations, come, please, help us with our crime. Training to take our guns, going to a crime-ridden city. What do we think they're going to do there? Take guns. Now this is where we go to the next level. I got a report today from someone who lives near Chicago. He was listening to an online news program that started to talk about the UN coming to Chicago. The transmission was cut. He switched over to radio, hit the old tuner button on the car. They were talking about it. They also were reporting that their transmission had been cut, jammed, whatever you want to call it. The powers that be in that area of the country are very interested in keeping this move quiet. They don't want people to realize that this favor of the UN has been asked. They don't want us thinking and then talking and then someone else listening to this idea that a foreign jurisdiction is going to come into our country, bypass the feds, bypass Homeland Security, bypass everything and start policing our streets, knocking on everyone's door. Give us your guns. We're here to make your city a safer place. Now, for me personally, I live on the West Coast. Chicago, you guys are fucked. You have to deal with your own problems, right? And that's the attitude a lot of people have. I'm just taking that attitude for the purposes of discussion. I am pissed about it. I don't want Chicago to have one blue-helmeted prick in there, right? If they go to Chicago, if the UN is allowed in, even if it's to escort police door to door and let police do their job, once they put foot on this soil, there is a level of acceptance by politicians of their presence and their authority. If they start taking part in police action in our soil, in our country, not on a military base, but in the civilian sector, in our world, once they participate, even as an observer or as an assistant, whether or not they are armed, we now have a nexus. We have an example. We have a precedent. A precedent is established. The UN can be here and they can assist. The next step would be the UN doing it without an American citizen being with them, and them having guns and them enforcing laws on their own. And now that that precedent is set, what's the next step? Instead of enforcing American gun laws, they bring their own gun laws. And they're enforcing UN policy on American soil. Now, I know this is the slippery slope argument. I know that it is a logical fallacy to say, if they take one step, they're going to take these other steps. I understand the dangers in taking that. I also have case history of government using incremental programs, incremental steps to move from an idea to a policy, to a law, to us losing our rights. People don't even quote the Fourth and Fifth Amendments as a self-protection, don't bother me government anymore. Because police, The courts and even lawmakers just don't give a shit. They pass laws to bypass, sidestep the Fourth and Fifth Amendments. The cop just has to feel threatened. Or say reasonable suspicion. They don't need probable cause. They don't need a warrant. All they need to do is create exigent circumstances in their mind. That is, think that there might be a crime being committed on private property. And they at that point have the right to enter that property. Thomas Jefferson would be spinning like a breakdancer in his grave. I think he is. The Founding Fathers did not intend to be for the law to be manipulated in such a way that the protections granted us by the Bill of Rights could be excused away on the mere belief that the cop thinks there just might be a crime somewhere being committed. It used to be they would have to have evidence. Take that evidence to a court in the form of an affidavit, swear, that is, testify under penalty of perjury and criminal prosecution against them that they have real evidence that something is going on, and then go get that criminal. In other words, do some fucking police work. Now, that's what you and I have to deal with from our own law enforcement. Americans thinking that they're following the rules. What do you think is going to happen when the United Nations is conducting police operations on our soil? Do you think they're going to give a fuck? They're not going to give a frog's fat ass about our Constitution. They're going to go to a door, they're going to knock on it. If it's not answered, they're going to break it in, and they're going to look for guns. That's where they're going with this. That's the precedent they want set. They want to establish that as acceptable. And they're going to, of course, they're going to use the media. Oh, I can't wait to see Good Morning America, the Today Show, showing us how these great UN troops are here assisting our poor police who are outgunned by criminals in Chicago. And what great work they're doing. And they'll have a guy with a blue helmet handing a turkey to a kid. Oh, they're feeding us out of the goodness of their heart. Who the fuck supports the UN financially? That's right, the United States government. Where do they get their money? From you as a taxpayer. From me as a taxpayer. The U.S. government takes our money, right, under threat from the IRS and law enforcement coming and taking your shit. They take our money, they have it sent to Washington, and then they decide how much they're going to spend in our country and how much they're going to spend abroad and just give money away. How many billions of dollars? So that a guy in a blue helmet can appear on the Today Show and hand some poor starving kid in Chicago a turkey and then make you, as an American, using propaganda, using CIA mind control techniques, get you to believe that they're here and they're good. I'm not going to put the links below. What I want you to do is go on the internet and look up UN soldier corruption, UN rape, United Nations rape charges. How about United Nations atrocities? Look it up. I've done it. Now, I don't know if Google's going to try hiding this shit, removing it, erasing it. You know, we can't have that fake news / truth out there. This is horrifying to me. A couple little items. So today, I send a encrypted message back to the 30-year government high-ranking official. And I said, you were right. Because I got a report from a friend that they saw troops in our country driving down the street, civilian street, in a uniform he couldn't identify. It didn't have a big UN on the door or he would have crapped his pants. I'm sure he would have crapped his pants. If I know this guy, he's about as red-blooded as I am. Maybe more. Fuck, I don't know. Right? What I do know is that he said we saw some troops in a uniform he's never seen, not American, on our streets heading towards Chicago in a military convoy. I've got the report that radio stations and internet broadcasts are being interrupted when they talk about this subject. We have the report that the guy in Chicago, whoever this idiot is, went to New York, saying, we need your help to the UN because we have a crime problem we can't handle. We are this close, folks. That close to something stupid, some stupid decision being made to bring UN troops, foreign troops, onto our soil. Right? We are now, these guys, you and me, we're now Homeland Security. A bunch of ragtag looking guys who don't like foreign terrorists coming to our country and then telling us we need to live under their laws instead of our own. Compared to a military force, patriots, the militia, which got a dirty name, look like this. Just ragtag guys. Except the free men and free women in America. We have guns. And a lot of us are military trained. A lot of us went to school, received an education, and understand the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Not only do we understand them, but we know the obligation that we have, the duty to throw tyranny out of our lives. Will it come to that? Or are you going to hand your gun over so that Dianne Feinstein can laugh a cackling witch laugh all the way to her mansion, knowing that you have had to turn your guns in or face a United Nations force in your neighborhood coming for you? I think this is a grand mistake on their part, this guy in Chicago. But I also think they're trying to introduce the idea to the American people that we need help. I tell you what, you want to get rid of crime in Chicago? Why don't you head into the Ozarks? Head over into Minnesota? Why don't you get a bunch of patriots together with their guns, American citizens, and work with them to create a solution and see if they're brave enough to come in and help? I think that'd be a much better idea than bringing an international police force into our country that doesn't understand our laws or believe in them, much less be willing to enforce them, and come into our cities and our states and tell us that we have to turn our guns in or else. I got into this discussion today at work. Someone said, well, this is the new law. I said, what's the penalty? They said, there is no penalty. That's just the law. I said, there is no law without a penalty. Asking me to do something without a penalty is no change in a law. What I'm saying is the United Nations, when they come here, if they say, everyone turn in your guns, we're going to give them the bird. We're going to tell them to go fuck themselves. If they say, though, turn in your guns or else, now we're dealing with a law. Now we're dealing with a regulation. Now we're dealing with a policy statement. Because failure to comply results in a consequential action on the part of the other force. And the other force, in order to enforce their law, their regulation, will have to use guns. That is an armed standoff. And that's what we're looking at dealing with. Do you want the UN here? I don't want our military assisting them. I don't want our military on the streets enforcing laws in this country. Our military is supposed to kill and destroy the enemy elsewhere. Police, I want them to obey the law, obey the Constitution. And for the most part, they do. Body cams are showing us, though, every day all the corrupt little pricks, and they need to remove them off the force. Let the good cops do their jobs, get rid of the bad cops. They can go get jobs at Walmart bagging groceries. Because that's about all they're good for. Once they've demonstrated they're willing to violate someone's rights. But we need good cops. We do. And we need Americans, red-blooded Americans, to pay attention to what the hell is going on. So that we don't have to face the same thing these guys had to face. So that in 100 years, you and I aren't portrayed like this, as a bunch of savages who were living under some bizarre concept of freedom. They had their freedom. They had their country. They had their laws. They had their rules. And they were overrun and forced to comply with someone else. They were the homeland security of their time. Today, you are the homeland security of this time. We've got to oppose this UN. First thing we can do is educate ourselves. Second thing we can do, send your congressman a letter or a phone call and say, what the fuck is going on? Get this fixed now. The third thing we can do is get prepared, right? Food, water, shelter, clothing, medicine, means of self-defense. Get your plan together. If the UN starts coming in, do you think they're going to stop at Chicago? Oh, they may stop for a year or 5. But once that precedent is set, you can be sure they're going to come back. Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic, made it to Hispaniola, discovered what he needed to, sailed back. And for the next 100 years, Central and South America found itself plundered by conquistadors there to steal everything they had, kill everyone who resisted, and force everyone to comply to their rules. I don't want to see that here. I am the new Homeland Security. You are the new Homeland Security. And believe it or not, that's enshrined in our laws and traditions, that every able-bodied man is a member of the militia. That is a patriot force that is required to protect his nation. Because it was understood, if you're not willing to protect your nation, then you're willing to be ruled by another. And if you love freedom, then you better oppose any force that would come to your nation to subjugate you. Because once they subjugate you, there will be no guarantee of any of your rights. And someday, perhaps I'll do a diatribe on rights and from whence they came. For now, I wish you a good night. I want to thank you for being a patron here. Thank you for coming to Patreon. I had a hell of a rough day, and I thought, man, am I going to do a video? And then I remembered, I'm going to go talk to a crowd on Patreon that appreciates me and isn't here to criticize and scream and yell and make everybody miserable with their bullshit. Anyways, I want to thank everybody for your time, for your integrity, for your concern, for your care, for your love. If I can do anything to improve the preparedmind.club, let us know. We're doing everything we can there to provide every service possible through the internet. From information to products to finding other preppers at Prepper Connect. You guys have a great night, a great day. Semper Fi, Chance Fairy Visit Prepared Mind. Merry Christmas, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers. Ho, 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 ho. Playtime is over. Get your Prepared Mind merchandise at thepreparedmind.club. Help keep free speech free and spread the word about the need to prep.